Welcome to Hadar's Web, a podcast featuring community conversations on spirituality, healing, justice, and art. My name is Hadar Cohen. I am your host, and I am delighted to invite you to my relational web. Today's guest is Hadar Ahuvia. Hadar Ahuvia is a performer, choreographer, ritual facilitator, music leader, and educator who foregrounds the body in political, social, and spiritual practice. She works with movement and voice and to suture across generations and creates spaces for transformation. Her essay, Joy Vey, on choreographing a diasporic identity beyond Zionism is featured in the Oxford Handbook of Jewishness and Dance. Her years-long research and deconstruction of Zionist folk dance have culminated in a cycle of performances tracing how Jewish Israeli identity is choreographed and transmitted, earning her a Bessie nomination for Outstanding Breakout Choreographer, a dance magazine 25 to watch in 2019, and is the subject of a documentary by Tatyana Tenenbaum, Everything You Have Is Yours. Ahuvia has performed and shared her research across the U.S., Turtle Island, and internationally. She is a rabbinical student, organizes with Rabbis for Ceasefire, leads Kabbalat Shabbat, third Fridays at Kolot Chayeinu in Brooklyn, and is working on a new cycle of performances that embody the distinctive sonic gestures of Easterners' European Ashkenazi davening. Welcome, Hadar. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Hadar. So nice to be with you.
Well, I'm so glad you are in my web. Usually I like to ask people how we've met or how we know each other, which we have a really interesting story because we're both named Hadar. So we have this name connection. But also we come from this place of using dance and movement to both engage with spirituality and politics. And yeah, I guess I want to start by asking you a little bit about your journey into dance and movement as a practice.
Well, I started dancing when I was 3. I probably started dancing before that, but when I was 3, my mom put me in dance classes. But I would say that dance really became my own spiritual, politicized practice. Probably when I was like 22, 23, coming back to dance after taking a break for like mental health and to kind of establish an identity for myself and like a spiritual practice for myself that was distanced from dance. Like up until that point, my identity and how I saw myself in the world was so tied up in a way that's kind of dysfunctional with dance. This happens for a lot of people who grow up doing ballet and Western dance. So that was a really powerful break for me. I really focused on my spiritual practice for like a year and doing some healing and came back to dance in a way that was like very politicized. And that like both from like a understanding like my own body politic and understanding my identity and like every gesture suddenly became like full of meaning. I'm like, why this gesture, right? Like now that I have taken a big step back and said I actually don't have to do any of the movements with which I was raised, trained, what meaning, like why come back to the body, why come back to choreography. So everything really became a choice in a way that was, I'm like really grateful to have had that break and to be able to come back with like fresh eyes and a different perspective to dance.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and movement holds so much. You know, it's our learned patterns, it's our behavioral ways of existing in this world. And yeah, I guess I want to hear a little bit of both your spiritual journey and your political journey because it feels like they kind of happened in parallel almost, or they were constantly informing one another, which, you know, I find to be quite rare in our world. So yeah, curious how your spiritual journey or your political journey or anything you want to share about that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say like it started, so this year that I took a break off, it was sort of to heal from disordered eating, which I never thought I would have. Like seeing it in the world around me. And so I just like to say that because it's not something that people choose to have. And so doing that healing work really started to do like also the like psychological, like emotional separation work from my family, and like all the enmeshment that was like part of what some of that, so those like non-survival patterns were about. You know, it was like trying to survive in a really dysfunctional setting. So that, you know, that included like detangling like political, right, like ideologies, yeah, that are like around Zionism, like the way that the family is organized, the way that emotional, you know, national identities, like that, it was all like very much intertwined for me. I think, you know, some of the dysfunction comes from a lot of internalized anti-Semitism and fear, like thinking that having a particular kind of body, a particular kind of appearance is going to help you be safe. And also like a lot of the severity coming from a feeling that like isolation is the only way for us Jews to be safe, in the way that like it trickles down from geopolitical understandings to really like interrelationally, that competition is the only way to be safe. So yeah, it was really took some time to like reorient to dance as a practice that could connect me to people, both in like a concert, I don't know, like performative space, right? Like how to think about movement as a way of connecting, rather than like as a way of like proving myself. And in terms of like these, you know, I was always like, when I was doing my, like I worked a lot in improvisation even before I took that break from dancing. And it was like always the motors were like the things that, right, were like the earliest songs that I heard, right? Like those were the things that I would sing to myself that would drive me. And I just became really curious about like, well, what are these songs? Like, why do these songs like drive me? What is the engine behind them? And so that's part of what kind of got me doing this research about Israeli folk dance. I was like, what are these songs that I'm singing? Like, what are these dances that are in my body? And yeah, asking about this Zionist identity. Like, I also knew that like so much of my family's like focus on the body was this other kind of internalized anti-Semitism about like what the new Jewish body was about. And what it could look like, what was healthy, what was unhealthy. Really like kind of eugenicist ideas about Jewish bodies in Europe, or ideas about, you know, European Jews being disembodied, and my family being part of like the settler enterprise, and joining the Palmach, and you know, becoming warriors, becoming workers of the land, becoming these new Jews that were embodied in different ways, that had dances that like connected us to really specific places and land, like that. Sort of started to like open the box on like how that was transmitted to me, and how I, you know, so there's that, and then there was like the ballet world and like the concert dance world. So I was like really kind of like unraveling both of these things at the same time.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so curious to hear you speak about this more. And I know you have a film that was made about your dance relationship to specifically Israeli folk dance and deconstructing it. But yeah, the way that Zionism really rejected Jews of the past, or Jews in different places, and kind of created this new identity of the new Jew. And obviously we see that a lot with masculinity as well, as like, okay, we're not going to be weak Jews anymore. We're going to be strong. We're going to defend ourselves. But I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit about how you saw that in specifically Israeli folk dance. Like, what was the purpose of these dances? What was this new Jewish body that was formed through the creation of the state of Israel? Yeah, and how you see kind of this project of shaping new movement patterns to understand ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's like dance, right? It's so powerful because it is a way to like shape our bodies, to shape how we relate to the world and relate to other people. And so part of what Zionist choreographers wanted to do was like create a new collective identity, right? From like super diverse Jewish peoples who had completely different musical cultures, movement cultures, right? To create a melting pot, to define a relationship to a land in which they were settlers, and to try to imagine what movement would feel like, look like, if they had, if Jews, and there were Jews, right, who have had continuous relationships to that land. But these choreographers who were from Europe and had Eastern European or like European dance training did not. And so like a lot of romantic choreographers of that time, there was a lot of like Orientalism, a lot of looking to dances of the East, to imagine some kind of like exotic but authentic relationship to land or to spirit. And so they looked pretty specifically to Palestinian, to Bedouin, to Druze communities that were around them, and to Yemenite Jewish dances also, to try and formulate like, well, imagine what this new Israeli identity that was like very intentionally disconnected from Ashkenazi culture, in the way that they rejected, right, the rejection of diaspora culture. I think Yemenite culture was really unique in the Zionist kind of imagination, because they thought they were like had like some kind of contiguous relationship, or because they were so isolated that maybe they were retraining some like true kernel of what temple Judaism had been. So kind of like I'm not like a historian of that, but it seems to me like idealized notions of like what authenticity could be. Like that notion is obviously so complex. So yeah, and the other pieces of like the agrarian culture is like the dances were often being made like for like Palmach, or like pre-state army organization dance groups. Like there's like no separation, in this enterprise between like the cultural project and the settlement project, and and like and understanding the only way to, right, like create a Jewish majority in that land requiring violent, an army, and violence. So they're like these things sort of like kind of woven together. And sometimes the dances were created to celebrate battles. Sometimes the dances were created to like fill needs. They were like, oh, we have no couples dances, so this woman choreographed a couples dance for like the army brigade. And it was also really early on created both as like an internal practice and also as a performative practice for the communities and that were like settling in Palestine, and also to be outward facing to the world, to show, look, there is a new Israeli culture that is separate and distinct from diaspora culture, to make it real, to legitimize like the new state, and just like the idea of like a joint peoplehood that they were building there.
Yeah, and it reminds me also a bit about the language project as well, right? Of like the erasure of so many different languages like Yiddish or Judeo-Arabic or Ladino, or all these different languages that people are speaking, to this kind of now modern Hebrew that the nation is gonna centralize around. So it makes sense that there's also, okay, let's forget all these other movement patterns and just centralize around one. And with Israeli folk dance, I think it's also interesting because it's not something that was just like, oh, well, this is Israeli folk dance. It also kind of became Jewish folk dance as it was exported, especially to the US and summer camps. And that's, what a lot of people here grow up learning how to do in summer camps, and usually have a very deep connection with that. So yeah, curious to hear about how you discovered this kind of violence in that history of both the theft from Palestinian and Arab communities, but also in terms of like the connection to militarization and like the type of Jew that now is coming about through these folk dance.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to say also, right, like people don't know that like Yiddish folk dance exists or don't know the different kind of dance traditions that existed because Israeli folk dance has been so successfully exported in the way that modern Israeli Hebrew or the way that that music um, sometimes, right, like replaced different kinds of melodies that people were singing even in synagogues. Um, so yeah, some of the ways that I did this research, like, some of it was like kind of going through my memory of like remembering like what I had been told um, about the dances. And, there was a part that was like, it feels like exploring my own body, my own experience feels like an important part of the research. And yeah, like, I'm like, right, part of like why this was so effective is like, it's really amazing to like dance with people. It like, in my own experience, right, it brought really different kinds of people together. We danced with like this dance group that my mom had really different kinds of Jews, non-Jews who were able to come together. So I was like, I had sort of like firsthand experience of like, oh, like this is how this um, activity like feeds people. Um, and yeah, I think the first research that I did around it was even like a book that my mom gave me. It was like, reading the archives of these choreographers, like they kept very assiduous archives in the ways that many, Jewish traditions, lineages do. I was just reading about the like pink, like every community in Eastern Europe had like its own pinkas, had its like community um, archive, collective archive. So I don't know, but the Zionists were like very proud of what they were doing, and there was a lot of archiving early on in that project, and like no concern or like hiding about what how they were articulating it. So there are several American books. There's books in Hebrew. So I'm just like starting to do a little bit more digging into the archive. There's a woman who did her dissertation that wasn't published in Hebrew at the University of Tel Aviv about the construction of ethnicity and gender in Israeli folk dance. And she had gone through the archives in Israel and just had like some really incredibly like I don't know, like rich, like detailed material, people talking about how they created certain particular dances. Gurit Kadman, who was the founder of the folk dance movement, talking about new dances as they were being made, talking about the dance competitions and pageants that they held to create new dances. Rivka Stuhlman talking about, seeing the need for a couples dance and creating it for the Palmach in 1947, participating in like the socialist youth movement dance competitions in Moscow. Um, things like that.
Yeah.
People's journals, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
it was really, for me as a choreographer, it was like so interesting to read these choreographers talking about their process. And being like already like hearing their like self-consciousness about using Yemenite dance or using Palestinian dabke and feeling like defensive about it, talking about it defensively and saying that like actually it was their artistic voice that was more important. It wasn't the fact of these collective sources, but because they were choreographers, it's because like a modernist idea of like a single authorship. They they named each new dance. It was like made for a very specific piece of music. So they could say this is my dance. There are also archives of like the folk dance choreographers. I don't know, they would have like meetings. It was an organization. They would have meetings and like their conversations about authorship and getting credit and payment, like as the dance, as Israel like stops being a socialist country that it, I don't know, like I think the veneer of the socialism finally falling away, right? I don't know that it was ever actually, right? Really, so it was like socialist for white Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah, like the myth of kibbutzim as being this utopian model.
So yeah, once they start getting like engaging in like a global capitalist market, that they're like really concerned about how they maintain authorship and get paid for the dances that they created. So there's actually like it's a very extensive archive that exists.
Well, it reminds me of what you're saying, the way that culture, like so much of Jewish culture has been made to kind of serve the Israeli military and the Israeli state. And I think that's part of how the Zionist movement was so successful in a lot of Jewish spaces. And you see that especially in America, where people don't want to be critical of Israel because they think that's just their Jewish culture. And I see that a lot also with Arab Jewish lineages of just people being like, well, I'm just practicing my culture, but that culture has been in some ways taken to serve this nationalistic project. So I very much see that what you're saying also in these folk dances, which in some ways, right, especially as children, when they grow up doing it, is something that is connective, community. People have, yeah, like joy with it. There's also sexuality involved with, especially with camp people dancing, which I think is also a huge part of how the Zionist project succeeded in kind of bringing, this kind of sexualized new Jewish body. Yeah, so I really see that kind of connection between cultural Jewish practices just being kind of remorphed to just serving the state, which is just so sad.
Yeah. I was like watching, there was a video yesterday that I saw online of, I don't know what sect but like religious nationalists, like doing to me what looks like, Yiddish, like Hasidic dance and chanting flatten Gaza. And it was so horrifying. And they're wearing like tzitzis and yarmulkes. I don't know, so just I'm like, dance can be violent. For like dance could be an expression of like collective, like violent collective identity, right? That like it's not, I don't know, I mean, art, right? Art, there's like art and dance can be wielded for like a variety of political aims. And it was like so heartbreaking to see, yeah, the way that Judaism has been, right, like is being like divorced like of its meaning, and that instead we're like it's become an ethno-nationalist expression, which is like what, right, was like the source of oppression for Jews for millennia. It's just like so disgusting that this is what the state is making of Judaism. Yeah, and and it happens in language, it happens in the synagogue, it happens like the way that the art project was so, the identity is so, I feel like the way that like the militarized identity is like so interwoven into the fabric of like being Israeli. Like I think about how long it took me to kind of undo that. Like I really wanted to serve until I was like 17 or 18. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe not because I want to dance. But there was still like, there was like the way that it's become a social cultural element. Which is why I'm like, really like impressed by people who are refusing to serve right now. Like it seems obvious to us from the outside, but the brainwashing, the way that it's like such an integral part of the identity of like what it means to, and even just like language, the way that language is used to describe, right, that it's like the defense forces, that you're protecting your country. What do you mean I'm oppressing people? It's a defense force. It's like such an Orwellian like twist to like to get through the layers of meaning, like requires a lot of work that I'm glad more and more people are doing. But,
Yeah. And this kind of production of social cohesion
yeah.
being central to even having an army in the first place. And I think you touched about this in the beginning of kind of using so much of the internalized anti-Semitism that people were coming from around fears of belonging. And I really see that with Israeli society because it's like to speak up, for Palestinian liberation almost feels like, oh, you're going to be exiled and excluded from every social thing you've ever been a part of. And the way that then kind of this social belonging is used to further violence onto Palestinians, it's quite intense. But then, you look at other examples, Nazi Germany is also a huge part of like creating this social group. Yeah, and this wound of belonging, which I guess I'm curious to ask you a bit of how you relate to it now, because I know you also are a rabbi in training and you also do a lot of work around nigunim and Jewish prayers and reviving different liturgical traditions. So yeah, like how do you see your own relationship to your lineage now?
Yeah, so I've been, part of like my journey of creating a Jewish identity that is not grounded in Zionism, like brought me back to Jewish practice. I think as it is for many people. And it felt really important for me, like in some ways it's an anti-Zionist practice, but it's also a practice that's like, doesn't like it's like Zionism at the center of like what it means to be Jewish. That it's like, it's a relationship to a divine, it's a relationship to other people. It's a way of, and I do feel that there were elements that like, are like, to me, like kernels that are like hidden in the dances and hidden in the music of like this Hasidic expression, that, that some of the choreographers, some of like my family like came to Palestine with. And then I've had to like kind of like do some digging to be like, well, where does that music come from? Where does that kernel come from that does give me like really deep, like a spiritual experience that for me, like, because it's not connected to my family's identity, feels like it's a non-Zionist expression. I know that there are religious Zionists who are using these same melodies, and religious expression to, do horrific, violent things in Palestine. For me, it's been a way of reclaiming an identity that my grandparents rejected. Reconnecting to like my great grandmother, who was like very devout, like when Tel Aviv was being bombed, she like really reluctantly moved to Palestine in the 1930s from Germany. And when Tel Aviv was being bombed, she like went up to the attic and was reading Psalms. Like that was like kind of the level of like her. There's like this it's like irrational, but there's something about the religious imagination and the way that it is irrational that feels so critical to imagining political futures. So that's something of like prayer, like after doing all this work of deconstructing Zionist Israeli kind of identity in my body, I was like, prayer feels to me like a practice of what I want to practice. It's like a practice of like visioning a future, and you can call it like, that's for me like what the messianic idea is like being able to practice something being beyond comprehensible, could be achieved in our lifetime, and like keeping that nearby. Yeah, and like having, that it's like, there isn't like a materialist goal to that practice, right? It's a practice of connecting to the divine and connecting to other people. So that has felt so like nourishing. Like I feel like so much more grounded in myself, and in like just like the varieties of like Jewish peoplehood, and also like digging deeper into Eastern European Jewish music. I'm like, there's so much richness there. Yeah, that we've like, some of us have lost. Some people have like this music has been kept alive by some communities. And I feel like it also like digging, like grounding in that has like helped me to hold space for difference, for like difference in Jewish community, difference outside of Jewish community, sort of like be able to place to like, friend Daniel Boynick says, is that like memory and imagination are like opposite sides of each other. So in order to like have imagination, I feel like I really needed to reconnect to like the memory of my people.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I see that also with the political action that you're engaged in. I know you're part of Rabbis for Ceasefire and different political action for Palestine, but I find it so fascinating how for so many Jews, rejecting Zionism actually strengthens their Jewish connection, in kind of diving into prayer and liturgy, but then in also showing up politically, and that, I think that sometimes it could feel like, because of all the different propaganda that's out there, that's like, oh, if I do this, that means it's outside of my Judaism. But to actually say like, no, actually, I can be doing both. I can be engaging in my prayer lineage and being in solidarity with Palestinians. And that's not in contradictions. They're actually mutual
Yeah.
processes that are occurring simultaneously, which I think you do so beautifully.
Yeah. And I've really like loved how you've modeled that, and also just like the way that you have spoken about spirituality so openly has been really like powerful, and I appreciate that. It's like, I think, opened a path for a lot of people in a way that like politics and spirituality, I don't know, I even just think like what the conversation was like 10 years ago was so different. Yeah, and being with Rabbis for Ceasefire has been really powerful because we're like, yeah, we're a group of rabbis who are saying that dafka, like insisting that our spirituality and the moral tradition of Judaism, um, that solidarity with Palestinians is essential to it. And that like the leadership of that group is in relationships of accountability with Palestinians. So it's like also not just an idea. It's like there are real relationships there. Which is like that's like the future.
Mm.
It's like I also, I think about the ways that like family and spirituality. I mean, like there's many different kinds of expressions of Palestinian identity in the same way that there's like a variety of Jewish expressions. But it's also like helped me kind of like soften in my relationship to my family and have some more empathy and have also like courage because like my reliance is like my sense of place is coming from something that's like beyond my family. Like I'm really grateful to my family for like the specific like learnings that I got in this lifetime through them. But like, the divine is like a higher parent that I can lean on, that can support me as I like, go beyond what felt possible. So I don't know, like just to kind of like tie back how much like this personal spiritual journey has been so connected to the political journey, and like the detangling of enmeshment, can be really painful, but it's worth it on the other side.
And your process was documented in a film. Everything you have is yours. Do you want to share a little bit about that film? I know you're still touring, there's still events going on.
Yeah.
So do you want to share a little bit about the film and what's coming up?
Yeah. So my dear friend Tatyana Tenenbaum asked if she could film me starting 2017. And we thought it would be like a short 5-minute video. And over the years, it slowly became a feature film documentary. And she's done an incredible job and expanded the film to not just be about me, but weave in the stories of Freedom Dapka Group, or a Palestinian Dapka troupe in Staten Island, who do really beautiful, incredible work. Hadar Cohen, who's a Yemenite Israeli American choreographer, and some of the collaborators who worked with me on the dance pieces, Lily Bo Shapiro, Zave Martovar-Jono, and Maura Mindell. And so it's this like beautiful tapestry of people using dance as resistance, as resilience, and finding, expressing their identities through the body. What it means to have freedom of movement feels like at the core of like kind of what unites the different threads of the film. And we are having a couple more screenings at DCTV at the end of August 22nd and 25th. And we're also going to have some online screenings. You can stay tuned. You can follow the film account. Everything you have is yours on Instagram to find out more about that. Yeah, really excited to be bringing it around the country and sharing it with more people and having conversations about it.
It's beautiful. Well, is there anything we haven't touched base on that you want to talk about?
No, I just really, appreciate being able to have this conversation with you, and thank you for making this space of like art, spirituality, politics being so woven together. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm so delighted to have you in my web as a fellow movement person, and like really thinking about how do we inherit things on an embodied level in a way that we might not necessarily consciously think about, but we're moving that way in that world. And I think it does require spiritual commitment to look at that. So I appreciate all the work that you do. And if you're listening, highly recommend you check out this film. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Hadar.
you.